My sister shoved my son's face into his birthday cake and called it a surprise. Despite my son crying, my dad still defended her. Next morning, Grandma smashed his beloved car, claiming a lesson must be taught. I live in a suburb of Atlanta, Georgia, with my wife Lauren, 32, who works as an elementary school teacher. She's a calm woman, but she has firm principles, especially when it comes to our son Nicholas, who just turned 11. He's a sensitive and introverted boy. Instead of playing outside like most kids, he prefers to spend hours reading or building complex castles with Lego bricks. My sister Tiffany, who is 25, is the complete opposite. She works in marketing for a startup and has that attitude of needing to be the center of attention at every gathering. She was always the spoiled one in the family, something we never tried to hide. My father, Robert, who worked his entire life at an insurance company before retiring, never denied her anything. He felt guilty because Tiffany was born prematurely, and so he spent her life justifying everything she did. Faced with any criticism, he would repeat the same phrase: "Tiffany just wants everyone to have a good time." My mother, Susan, works part-time at the library and avoids conflict at all costs. She would always tell me quietly, "I know your sister is in the wrong, but your father won't stop defending her." And with that, the problem was never solved. The piece that completes this puzzle is my grandmother, Eleanor, 78, a woman who was a carpenter for 40 years and now lives alone. She has a moral clarity that commands respect. She once told me, "Son, there are times when you need a hammer instead of words." At the time, I laughed, thinking it was just a saying. I never imagined that one day she would act on that idea in earnest. To understand what happened, you have to go back 6 months. It was my birthday during a family barbecue. Everything was going well until it was time to cut the cake. As I leaned in to blow out the candles, Tiffany ran up from behind and shoved my face into the chocolate cake. Everyone laughed except me. My face was covered in frosting and cake while she cackled as if it were the funniest joke in the world. The worst part was looking at Nicholas, who was a few feet away, his eyes wide with fear. That night, while Lauren was giving him a bath, he confessed something to her that sent a chill down my spine. "I don't want Aunt Tiffany to do that to me." When Lauren told me, I felt a knot in my chest. I immediately called my sister and spoke to her bluntly. "I hope you don't even think about trying that with my son." But her response made it clear she wasn't taking it seriously. "Oh, you're overreacting. It was just a joke." Then she hung up. I thought she had gotten the message that she would respect my boundaries. I was wrong. A month later, the big day arrived, Nicholas's 11th birthday. We decided to celebrate at my parents' house because they have a large yard and a pool perfect for a kid's party. My son had picked out his cake 3 weeks earlier. After spending hours looking at designs online, he decided on a chocolate castle with cream towers and little flags. He had been dreaming about that cake for months. Lauren prepared everything, meticulously decorating the garden with a night theme and shades of blue and silver, and even got a night costume for Nicholas. She invited 8 of his best friend's kids he shares school and Lego club with. That morning, while Lauren was finishing the preparations in the kitchen, Nicholas approached me in the garage with a worried expression. "Dad, Aunt Tiffany isn't going to ruin my cake, is she?" It broke my heart to hear him. I knelt down to look him in the eyes and assured him, "No, son, I already talked to her. Everything will be fine today." During that week, I had seen him practicing in front of the mirror, how to blow out the candles, close his eyes, and make the wish he had been saving for so long. The party started. At 2 p.m., his friends arrived, delighted with the decorations. They played a treasure hunt, jumped in the pool, and couldn't stop admiring Nicholas's costume. Everything was perfect until 2:45 p.m., when I heard a car engine. Tiffany's red Honda pulled up Criteria's house. She got out in a flashy outfit, a neon pink top, ripped denim shorts, and tall boots. She wanted to shine even at a child's birthday party. She threw her arms up and shouted, "Ready for your surprise, champ!" The look Lauren shot me was enough to understand what I had to do. I walked over and whispered to her, "Remember what I told you?" She replied with disdain. "Relax, I just want to wish him a happy birthday." I didn't answer. I decided not to take my eyes off her for the rest of the party. The most important moment arrived: the cake. Lauren placed the majestic castle cake on the decorated table. The children surrounded Nicholas, excited. My son was smiling with a pure happiness, the biggest I had ever seen on him. Lauren lit the 11 candles while everyone sang happy birthday. He closed his eyes, took a deep breath, and then it happened. Out of the corner of my eye, I saw a pink flash approaching. Before I could react, Tiffany lunged forward and shoved Nicholas's face into the cake. The impact was loud. Frosting flew everywhere, and worse, one of the candles was still lit. It grazed my son's left cheek, leaving a slight burn. Silence fell over the yard. No one moved. Everyone was frozen. Nicholas's 8 friends were paralyzed, not understanding what had just happened. The silence shattered the joy that had reigned just seconds before. The 2 youngest, Olivia and Daniel, burst into tears, frightened by witnessing something so aggressive and unexpected. They had never seen an adult act that way toward a child. Nicholas remained motionless, like a statue, for 5 long seconds. Chocolate dripped from his hair down his face, and cake crumbs stuck to his night costume. Finally, the boy broke down in tears. Without a second thought, Lauren ran to him, hugged him tightly, and whispered with a trembling voice, "It's okay, honey. Mom's here." I, on the other hand, didn't react immediately. I was petrified, trying to process what had just happened. When I could finally speak, I stared at Tiffany and spat out with contained rage. "What the hell did you just do?" She, instead of showing the slightest remorse, let out a nervous laugh and replied, "It was just a joke. I do it with everyone." I felt my blood boil. I took a step closer and reminded her in a firm tone, "I warned you never to do that to my son." In that instant, my father Robert shot up and yelled at me, "Don't talk to your sister like that." Meanwhile, my mother leaned toward Tiffany and said in a low but firm voice, "You should apologize to Nicholas." It was chaos. The children were terrified, not knowing where to hide. Andrew, one of my son's friends, walked over and gently hugged him. "Are you okay?" he asked, his voice filled with concern. A few feet away, Olivia, the youngest girl, glared at Tiffany and said loudly, "She's mean." The parents who were starting to arrive to pick up their children were shocked by the scene. Some looked at each other uneasily, as if wondering whether they should intervene. No one was paying attention to the destroyed cake or the unopened presents. The birthday party had turned into a complete disaster, and the only thing on my mind was protecting Nicholas from more pain. As my son sobbed in Lauren's arms, his small face covered in tears and chocolate frosting, I thought, this wasn't the birthday he dreamed of. Then, in the midst of that unbearable tension, my grandmother stood up from her chair. Her voice, deep and serene, cut through the silence. "Listen to me, everyone." The conversations died instantly. Even the wind seemed to stop. With her eyes fixed on Tiffany, my grandmother asked, "You were warned clearly. Why did you do it?" Visibly nervous, Tiffany stammered, "Grandma, I just wanted everyone to have fun." But the old woman's voice was sharp. "Do you see Nicholas having fun? Look at him." The color drained from my sister's face. She wasn't used to being confronted like that. Meanwhile, my son continued to tremble in his mother's arms. My grandmother then turned her gaze to my father. "Son, do you see your grandson crying?" Irritated, he replied abruptly, "Don't tell me how to raise my grandchildren. Every parent disciplines their own child." The silence that followed was so thick that no one dared to breathe loudly. My mother looked down, ashamed, while the invited parents stood still, unsure whether to leave or wait. I could hear the sound of Nicholas's choked sobs and the whisper of the wind rustling the leaves. My grandmother held my father's gaze for long seconds before uttering words that chilled me to the bone. "All right, I understand." She didn't say with anger, but with a coldness that sounded like a farewell, as if something inside her had broken forever. Lauren, moved to tears, looked at me and whispered, "Let's go home." I nodded silently. I grabbed our jackets, and before leaving, I looked at Tiffany. "Think about what you did." She shot me an annoyed look and replied, "You're overreacting. It was just a joke." It was in that instant that I understood. No one, absolutely no one, tried to stop us. There were no apologies, no intention of fixing things. They just watched us leave as if we were the guilty ones. My grandmother stood up too, with eyes full of disappointment. She looked at my father one last time and said goodbye. But it sounded like something final, not just a simple goodbye. 3 other families gathered their things and left without a word, not wanting their children to witness the tense atmosphere any longer. From outside, I heard my father's voice say with contempt, "They're making a drama out of nothing." Those words pierced my soul. He hadn't understood a thing. Tiffany, sitting in silence, stared at her chocolate-stained hands with a look of bewilderment. Perhaps she was beginning to realize that her joke hadn't made anyone laugh. My mother, exhausted, collected the remains of the cake, murmuring under her breath, "What a shameful birthday." The drive home was completely silent. Nicholas didn't say a word. Lauren sat in the back seat, hugging him tenderly and gently wiping the last traces of frosting from his face. When we arrived, my son refused to eat dinner. He went straight to his room, got in a bed, and pulled the blanket over his head, not wanting to talk to anyone. Lauren helped him change, and while cleaning the last bits of chocolate, she noticed a slight burn on his left cheek from a candle. It wasn't large, but the skin looked irritated. "We should call the doctor to check it out," she told me, worried as she placed a small bandage on it. It was then that Nicholas, his eyes swollen from crying, looked at her and asked, "Mom, why does Aunt Tiffany hate me?" That question left us speechless. I didn't know how to explain an adult's behavior to an 11-year-old boy. In the end, she just hugged him tightly, unable to say a word. I stood in the doorway watching my wife and son, feeling something inside me break. How could I explain to him that his Aunt Tiffany didn't hate him, but that she had never learned to respect others? That night around 9 p.m., as Nicholas was finally resting in his room, his phone rang. It was Andrew, one of his friends. I heard his voice through the speaker. "We think your aunt is a mean person." That made me feel an immense sense of shame. 11-year-old children could see the truth more clearly than the adults in my family. After Nicholas fell asleep, I called my grandmother. When she answered, I said, "Thank you for speaking up." She was silent for a moment before replying firmly, "Son, I'm not finished yet." The tone in which she said it sent a chill down my spine. I knew my grandmother. She didn't say things she didn't mean. If she said she was going to do something, she would do it. That night, lying next to Lauren, I stared at the ceiling, thinking about how I had really been protecting my son. Maybe it was time to make difficult decisions to take care of those who truly mattered. At 5 a.m., my grandmother arrived at my house. She knocked forcefully on the door and told me to accompany her to my parents' house. According to her, she had something to resolve. I got dressed without asking questions and followed her in silence. At 6 a.m., sharp, loud knocks echoed on my parents' door. My grandmother pounded insistently until someone opened it. My mother appeared surprised to see her, dressed in her old work clothes, a flannel shirt and worn jeans just like in her carpentry days. What stood out the most was the large leather bag she was carrying, so heavy it seemed to hold something important. Without a greeting, she said in a firm voice, "Get everyone downstairs. I have something to say." 10 minutes later, the family was gathered in the living room. My father, sitting on the sofa, had a scowl on his face, annoyed at being woken up so early. Tiffany came down in pink pajamas, her hair a mess, and her eyes puffy from sleep. My grandmother stood in the middle of the room, looked at everyone and declared, "This is your last chance." Tiffany must apologize to Nicholas in front of the entire family. As soon as she heard it, Tiffany shook her head. "I don't think I did anything wrong. It was just a joke," she replied brazenly. Then my grandmother turned to my father and looked at him with a coldness that froze the skin. "Letting bad behavior go unchecked has consequences," she warned him. He let out a dry, contemptuous laugh. "Do whatever you want. I'm not afraid of you." She watched him for a few more seconds and calmly repeated that phrase that always heralded a storm. "Very well. I've said enough." The air grew thick. My mother, nervous, whispered to my father. "You should listen to her," but he remained stubborn, waving his hand dismissively and muttering, "She's an old woman. What could she do?" My grandmother didn't flinch. She didn't respond with anger. She bent down, picked up her leather bag, and stood up, looking him straight in the eye. On her face, I saw something I had never seen before, an icy determination forged over a lifetime of defending what was right. Tiffany started to get uncomfortable. Her eyes searched for support but found only silence. Even my father seemed uneasy under my grandmother's gaze. She asked one last time, "You're not going to apologize?" Despite the fear that flickered in her eyes, Tiffany shook her head again. "I didn't do anything wrong," she repeated. My grandmother nodded as if she had expected it. She took her bag, walked to the door, and before leaving said calmly, "I know what I have to do." After she left, the living room fell silent. Tiffany looked at my father with anguish, as if she suddenly understood there would be consequences. and that he couldn't protect her. As we stepped out of the house, a loud crash shattered the neighborhood stillness. The sound of shattering glass woke everyone up. My grandmother was standing next to my father's red 1995 Mustang, holding an old wooden baseball bat, the same one I used to play with as a child. She had just smashed the windshield, scattering pieces across the driveway. My father ran out barefoot, shouting, "Are you crazy? That car is one of a kind." That Mustang was his pride and joy, the result of 3 years of restoring it from a scrap heap to pristine condition. He spent hours polishing every inch with obsessive dedication. My grandmother didn't answer. She raised the bat and smashed the front headlight, then the side mirror. Each impact sounded like an explosion in the morning calm. There were already 5 neighbors watching from their fences. Mr. Peterson from next door pulled out his phone to record everything. I knew this would be the talk of the town. I felt a sense of shame imagining the whole neighborhood talking about us. But at the same time, something stirred within me, a strange relief, as if someone was finally doing what I never dared to do. After the last blow, my grandmother stood tall, looked my father dead in the eye, and said, "I'm going to teach you a lesson. Do you want to know what it feels like to watch something you love be destroyed?" At that moment, Tiffany came out crying, the pillow crease marks still on her face. Between sobs, she screamed, "What are you doing? That's Dad's car!" For the first time, perhaps, she understood that her actions could unleash consequences beyond her control. My mother stood silently at the door, her face sad as if she had foreseen this outcome without being able to prevent it. My father, motionless, stared at the shattered car. His eyes were red, not with fury, but with a deeper sorrow, not just for the car, but for what had been broken inside him. My grandmother dropped the bat on the ground next to the destroyed vehicle as a warning. This is what happens when you don't learn respect. Then she turned and began to walk away. No one dared to stop her. The entire neighborhood fell silent watching her go. That same morning, the video of the incident went viral on a local Facebook group under the title, "78-Year-Old Grandma Teaches Her Son a Lesson." In just a few hours, it had hundreds of views and comments. Tiffany, ashamed, didn't know how to explain at work why her grandmother had destroyed her father's car. My father, furious, called the police but hesitated when they asked if he wanted to press charges. He knew that getting them involved would only make the situation worse, especially with the video spreading everywhere. He finally told the officers, "We'll handle it within the family." That same morning during my lunch break, I called my father to see how he was. As soon as he answered, I started to ask, "Are you okay?" He cut me off, shouting, "Your grandmother has lost her mind." She humiliated the entire family. Hearing those words stirred mixed feelings in me. On one hand, I understood the pain of seeing something you value destroyed. But on the other, I knew my grandmother had done what I never dared to do: defend my son. Things didn't get better in the neighborhood either. 3 families who were once close to my parents began to avoid them. When my father went out to get the mail, they would barely give him a polite nod before quickly going back inside their houses. That distance and silence made him feel isolated in the same place he had lived for over 20 years. Tiffany came home from a long, humiliating day at work. For the first time, she showed real fear. She asked my mother, "What is Grandma going to do now?" For the first time, my mother didn't jump to her defense. She responded coldly, "She warned you and you didn't listen." Those words hit Tiffany like a slap. Perhaps it was the first time in her life she understood that not even her mother would support her. For the first time, she felt alone with no idea what might happen next. When my mother told me about that conversation, I thought that maybe this would be the lesson they all needed, the one that would change something. 3 days later, the family lawyer, Henry Miller, arrived at my grandmother's house. He had been working with us for over 20 years, a serious man dressed in a gray suit and carrying his inseparable leather briefcase. My parents were invited to hear an update to the will. That call from the lawyer had made everyone uneasy. No one knew what to expect, but there was a bad feeling after what had happened days before. The living room was thick with tension. Henry sat at the center table with a stack of legal documents. My grandmother occupied her usual armchair, resting her chin on her hand, her gaze fixed on each person present. My father was next to my mother on the sofa, tried to appear calm, though his nervousness was obvious. Tiffany sat in a corner, her eyes red after a stressful day. The lawyer opened the folder and began to read. At the request of Mrs. Eleanor Vance, we will now proceed to update her will. At that moment, my grandmother stood up and announced, I am removing Robert from the will, including any rights to this house. That news hit my father like a lightning bolt. The house was valued at $400,000, and he had always counted on inheriting it to secure his retirement. He once told my mother, at least we'll never have to worry about where to live. After a few seconds of silence, my grandmother continued, if Tiffany does not apologize to Nicholas within 7 days, she will also be removed from the will. Henry continued reading the new distribution. Susan will receive 30%. Adam, Otusi, Lauren and Nicholas 20% each. My father slammed his hand on the table. His voice trembled with rage as he shouted, you can't do this. I took care of you all these years. My grandmother looked at him directly and replied calmly, you took care of me, yes, but you failed to teach your daughter to respect others. Tiffany collapsed in tears. She understood that not only her reputation, but also her financial future were at stake. She never imagined that what happened at a child's birthday party would have such serious consequences. My mother remained silent, her trembling hands clutching her purse. Her mother-in-law's decision shook her, but deep down she knew this was the inevitable result of years of protecting Tiffany from all responsibility. The tension in the room became suffocating. We all understood that my grandmother was not joking. She was willing to rewrite her legacy to defend her principles. After hearing the terms, my father stood up abruptly, his face red with fury. He stormed out of the meeting, slamming the door so hard it echoed through the house. It was clear he felt powerless and defeated. Tiffany continued to cry uncontrollably, but still insisted, I didn't do anything wrong. And hearing her say that filled me with profound disappointment. Not even with her inheritance on the line was she able to admit her mistake. What surprised me most was my mother's reaction. She stood up, signed the acknowledgement of the update, and said calmly, you did the right thing. In that instant, I understood she had endured my father's blind defense of Tiffany for years. She could finally express what she had always kept silent. After it all, I took Lauren's hand and said, all I ever wanted was for Nicholas to be treated with respect. What surprised me later was Nicholas's reaction. When he heard the lawyer read his name in the will, he nodded slightly as if he understood the weight of it. Henry added, the portion corresponding to Nicholas will be placed in a trust managed by Adam until he turns 18. When everyone had left, my grandmother called me aside and said, son, I didn't do this for the money. I understood exactly what she meant. It wasn't about assets. It was about teaching a lesson in respect and responsibility. At that moment, Tiffany began to understand the true consequences of her actions. She had not only lost her family support, she now faced the real possibility of being left without an inheritance. Tiffany was being held accountable for the first time in her life with no one to clean up the mess after her. I watched her tremble, looking around as if desperately searching for someone to defend her. But she found only silence and cold stares. No one ran to comfort her this time. Maybe, just maybe, she was finally understanding that every action has consequences and that there won't always be someone to protect her. The meeting ended in a silence so dense it was hard to breathe. Everyone knew the family would never be the same. The first week after my grandmother's decision passed under a cloud of constant tension and pressure, everyone was aware that Tiffany had only 7 days to make things right. For the first 2 days, my father called and visited my grandmother several times, begging her to reconsider. He promised to be firmer with Tiffany to correct her as he should have, but the response was blunt. All she has to do is apologize, nothing more. On the third day, Tiffany spent 3 hours in front of her computer trying to draft an email to Nicholas. She wrote deleted and rewrote an apology several times, but in the end, she didn't send it. Deep down, she was still convinced she had done nothing wrong. By the 4th day, my mother's patience ran out. She looked my father in the eye and told him bluntly, you need to learn how to be a father from scratch. On the 5th day, I received a call from Tiffany. Her voice was trembling. Can I see Nicholas? I want to talk to him. When I asked if she was ready to apologize, she replied, I just want to explain. On the 6th day, Lauren told me firmly, If she's only coming to justify herself and not to apologize from the heart, then it's not worth it. Finally, on the seventh day, Tiffany came to our house. She claimed she wanted to clear up the misunderstanding with Nicholas, but she still refused to admit she had done anything wrong. When the deadline passed without a sincere apology, my grandmother kept her word. Tiffany was officially out of the will. 2 weeks after the birthday disaster, my grandmother surprised us with an unexpected proposal. She wanted to throw a new party exclusively for Nicholas, a real celebration just for him. The guest list was short. Us and my son's 5 closest friends, the ones who hadn't left early or joined in the chaos. My grandmother's yard was completely transformed with a special theme, a night of honor. She spent the whole week preparing every detail from royal blue banners to handmade paper shields. She ordered a cake from an exclusive bakery in the city, a masterpiece in the shape of a castle with golden icing, and the phrase, "Nicholas, you matter." The atmosphere was warm and calm, exactly what my son had always wanted. No shouting, no mess, just the sincere laughter of children who wanted to be there. But the most emotional moment came when my grandmother appeared with a golden retriever puppy with light fur and a red bow around its neck. Looking at Nicholas, she said, "His name is Simon. Simon will always protect you. He will never hurt you." Lauren couldn't hold back her tears, seeing the smile on our son's face. For the first time in 2 weeks, Nicholas hugged his great-grandmother tightly and said, "I love you so much." In that instant, I knew this was his real birthday, a day where he felt seen, respected, and loved, as he always should have been. The change in Nicholas after that celebration was amazing. He used to be a shy boy who avoided conflict and preferred to stay quiet so as not to bother anyone. But something inside him changed. When Simon came into his life, he became more confident, and most importantly, he learned to say no when something didn't feel right to him. I remember one moment in particular. A classmate asked to borrow his favorite Lego set, and he replied kindly but firmly, "No, I'm sorry." At school, he proudly told the story of how his great-grandmother had stood up for him when no one else did. His friends were amazed to hear the story of his brave grandmother. What filled me with the most pride was when Nicholas decided to join the school's debate club, something he never would have considered before because speaking in front of others terrified him. Simon and Nicholas became inseparable. He spent hours teaching him tricks and took full responsibility for his care, from feeding him to taking him for walks. One afternoon, while watching them play in the yard, I said to Lauren, "He's a completely different kid now. He knows he deserves respect." She nodded and took my hand. At that moment, I understood that the best gift my grandmother had given him wasn't just a puppy, but the confidence to stand firm and the strength to protect himself. While Nicholas grew stronger every day, Tiffany's life was falling apart. At work, her colleagues began to distance themselves from her after the video of my grandmother destroying my father's car went viral and the family scandal became common gossip. Whenever Tiffany entered her room, conversations would abruptly stop. Her social life didn't improve either. Some friends began to question her directly. Why would you do that to a kid? For the first time, she had to face the real consequences of her actions without anyone defending her. She discovered that what she had dismissed as a simple joke had caused real harm. Then came the financial pressure. She now had to cover all her expenses alone. Rent, utilities, food, things my father used to quietly take care of. It was then that she realized how dependent she had been on the family. To top it all off, even my father began to distance himself, pressured by my mother, who made it clear she would no longer tolerate his blind protection. Over time, after several complaints at work about her attitude, Tiffany was required to start therapy. It was the first time she had to look in the mirror and confront the toxic behaviors she had always refused to acknowledge. The perfect life she thought she had completely fell apart. In the 3rd week after the incident, my father began to reflect on the upbringing he had given us. Between sleepless nights and the weight of watching his daughter lose everything, he finally faced a truth he had avoided for years. One night, sitting next to my mother on the sofa, he asked with a voice full of guilt, "Do you think I ruined Tiffany?" That question opened the door to memories neither of them wanted to revisit. He remembered all the times he had protected Tiffany since they were children, from making excuses to teachers when she didn't turn in her homework to quietly paying her speeding tickets. Each time he convinced himself it was his duty as a father to care for his daughter. However, facing the consequences of those decisions, he finally understood the damage he had caused. When he accepted his mistakes, he decided to talk to Tiffany and encourage her to offer Nicholas a sincere apology. But when he gently suggested she take responsibility for what happened, she exploded. "Why are you turning your back on me now?" That moment hit him hard. It was then he understood he had created a problem, a daughter incapable of admitting her faults, convinced she was always right. For the first time in his life, my father decided to side with his mother instead of continuing to defend Tiffany. He picked up the phone, called my grandmother, and said, "You were right. I failed with Tiffany." That was a turning point. He had finally chosen truth over blind loyalty. One quiet weekend afternoon, while Lauren took Nicholas to my grandmother's house to play with Simon, she invited me to sit down for a private conversation. It was the first time she had spoken to me openly about her past. We sat on the garden bench. She looked into the distance and began to tell me her story. She explained that after her parents died, she had to learn to work as a carpenter at 16 to survive. In a world dominated by men, she had no choice but to learn to defend herself and protect her worth in the face of judgment and discrimination. She told me something I will never forget, that sometimes you have to wield a hammer not to hurt or seek revenge, but to build and defend the boundaries that protect self-respect. Those boundaries aren't drawn to cause pain, but to preserve dignity, both our own and that of those we love. When I asked her about the change in the will, she sighed and confessed that she regretted allowing my father to indulge Tiffany for so long. She had believed that love would be enough to teach what was right, but life had shown her otherwise. She said she wished for Nicholas to grow up understanding that he deserves a healthy love without tolerating disrespect disguised as affection. After that talk, my grandmother began to teach Nicholas how to build a shelf with his own hands. He learned to hold a hammer, drive a nail with precision, and measure each board. But I knew it wasn't just carpentry she was passing on. She was teaching him to build his self-esteem, to recognize his own value, and to stand firm, knowing he deserves to be treated with care. It wasn't just about tools. It was a lesson in building a life based on respect. 2 months after everything happened, Tiffany wrote a sincere apology letter after several therapy sessions. It wasn't a quick text or an email, but a 3-page handwritten letter. In it, she admitted she was wrong, acknowledged the profound impact of her actions on Nicholas, and promised to work on becoming a better person. She didn't make excuses or try to blame anyone else. She took full responsibility for hurting her nephew. She decided to send it by mail instead of delivering it in person, understanding that the family needed space and time. When a letter arrived, we sat down together to read it with Nicholas. He listened to every word in silence, reflected, and finally said in a low voice, "I need more time to think." I respected his decision. The letter was a huge step forward for Tiffany, but rebuilding trust takes time. Additionally, Tiffany began volunteering at a community center with children, learning to interact with them in a healthy and respectful way. It was a clear sign that she was committed to changing. As Nicholas's next birthday approached, I agreed to let Tiffany send him a card, though she did not attend in person. It was a small but significant step. My father and Tiffany have also had to work on their relationship, this time based on mutual respect and not blind protection. It hasn't been easy, but it was necessary for both of them. Healing, like growing, takes time. 6 months after that incident, I decided to share our story on a podcast. I want to talk about the painful but valuable lessons we learned. I express my heartfelt gratitude to my grandmother, who dared to speak up when the rest of us remained silent. She taught us to value emotional boundaries, especially when it comes to children. The central message I wanted to convey was clear. Teaching children to defend themselves and speak up when they are mistreated is not optional. It is essential. No one, not even family, has the right to hurt them under the excuse of it's just a joke. Nicholas is no longer the shy and reserved boy he once was. He is now calm, self-assured, and knows how to love and be loved in a healthy way. Above all, he understands that he deserves respect. My family. Lauren, Nicholas, and I are closer than ever. We have clear boundaries, mutual respect, and a genuine sense of protection for one another. We have learned to speak up, not to stay silent. On the podcast, I said, "My son has a true hero, and that person is his great-grandmother." I closed the episode with the image of Nicholas sitting in the living room next to Simon, reading a book, safe, happy, and surrounded by the space we have worked so hard to provide for him. As for Tiffany, she is still on her path to healing. I have left the door open for reconciliation, but under one condition: she must respect my son. The final lesson I shared was this: true family is not about accepting harmful behavior, but about creating an environment where everyone feels respected and protected. That is our story. A birthday cake, a brave grandmother, and a lesson on the importance of setting boundaries to protect the ones we love. This is how my story ends.